Let us take a brief historical overview of Indian poetics. In this overview, our aim is to get familiarized with some of the important works that form the tradition of Indian poetics. We shall start in the 2nd century BC, and the earliest text available here is Bharatmuni's Natya Shastra. It basically deals with all the aspects connected to the drama and its performance. It also has the discussion of music, dance, acting, dramatic technique. It provides a general commentary on aesthetics and poetics, and most importantly, it gives us a very important theory, the theory of rasa, the rasa siddhanta. This is the theory of aesthetic relish or taste. From the 2nd century BCE, when we move forward in history and come to the 6th century, we have a scholar named Bhama who comes up with another theory, another treatise through his Kavyalankar. This Kavyalankar describes the qualifications of a good poet, different genres of poetry, qualities and defects of poetry, along with the various figures of speech, which are called as alankaras in Sanskrit. Then down in the 9th century, this Alankara school, Alankara doctrine, has been well accepted by the scholars, and Udbhata and Rudratta, these two scholars, they carry this tradition forward through their works. Kavyalankar Sar Sangraha by Udbhata and Kavyalankar by Rudratta. This is a continuation of the Alankara school, which was earlier established in the 6th century. In the next century, that is 7th century, we have a great poet, Mahakavi Dandi, who also responds to the 6th century theory of Alankar and who comes up with Kavyadarsha, his own treatise, showing 36 types of rhetorical devices for adornment of poetry, that is 36 Alankaras. This particular book systematizes the study of poetry by drawing our attention to the Guna Riti aspects. Dandi is recognized as the founder of another school, which is called as the Riti school. A Riti is a theory of language language used for literature. And this Riti school was further developed by another scholar named Vamana in 9th century in his Kavyalankara Sutra. The Riti theory emphasizes a special arrangement of words in poetry that is called as Vishishta Padarachana in Sanskrit. Vishishta Padarachana, a special arrangement of words. In the 9th century, we have a very significant text, Anandavardhana's Dhvanyaloka, which gives us another great theory, that is the theory of Dhvani. This is a theory of suggestion, the suggestion that indirectly evokes meaning in poetry, and this is considered to be the characteristic property of poetry. This new perspective was further elaborated in the 11th century by Abhinav Gupta, who wrote Lochana, which is also called as Dhvanyaloka Lochana. It's a commentary on Anandavardhana's Dhvanyaloka. Dhvanyaloka is a very, very important text in Sanskrit poetics. Another scholar, Abhinav Gupta, also wrote a commentary, Abhinav Bharati. This was a commentary on Natya Shastra. And here we have now the two important theories. One is of rasa and another is of dhvani. The scholars from here on, they tried to synthesize these two concepts of rasa and dhvani in their arguments, in their theories in the forthcoming eras. In the 10th century, Dhananjaya studied the theory of drama through his text Dasharupakam. This particular text discusses types of drama, the plot, the hero, heroines, emotive aspects of drama. In the same century, another scholar, Rajasekhar, wrote another important text, critical text, Kavya Mimansa. This is a practical guide to the poets that explains the elements of good poetry. Dhananjay, Rajasekhar, along with Kuntaka, another great scholar from the same century, form a very great or significant period in this tradition of Indian poetry. Kuntaka contributed a new theory called as Vakrokti. He wrote Vakrokti Jivitam, and through this treatise he propounded the theory of Vakrokti. He basically takes a stylistic approach and shows that Vakrokti or crooked speech, indirect speech, causes aesthetic delight. Now, this delight is manifested at six different levels of language. When we discuss the theory of Vakrukti in detail, we shall see how it does so. In the next century, that is 11th century, we have the last great theory of Indian or Sanskrit poetics, which is named as Auchitya. It was propounded by Kshemendra in his text Auchitya Vichar Charcha. This is a theory stating that different components of poetry have to be treated and applied properly in order to function ideally. Auchitya is propriety. What is proper? In this same period, 11th century, Mammata Bhatta organized all the important theories Rasa, Dvani, Alankara, Riti into a unified presentation in his text Kavya Prakasha. So, on one hand, we have scholars coming up with new theories like Auchitya. On the other, we have scholars who are making efforts to integrate these theories. The theory of Natya, dramatic theory, has been given special attention by the scholars in the next centuries, 12th century, 13th century, 14th century, by scholars like Ramchandra and Gunachandra, along with other scholars. They have their works like Natya Darpana, Bhava Prakasha. If we move to the 14th century, then we have this Kavyana Shasana by Vagbhata the second, prior to whom Vagbhata the first had also come up with Vagbhata Lankara. These are influenced by the schools that have been established so far, the schools of Rasa, the school of Dvani, Alankara, Jayadevan's Chandraloka in the 13th century, Vidyadhara's Ekavali in the 14th century. These are some efforts of the scholars that continue this tradition of critical discussion about literature. In the 14th century, we have a significant text called as Sahitya Darpana by Pandit Vishwanath that shows a fruition of this effort of bringing together the theory of poetics and dramaturgy. Although it establishes the superiority of the Dwani school, it also gives attention to all other major theories that had been propounded so far at that time. In the 15th and 16th century, the tradition of Indian poetics has continued through Bhanudatta's Rasamanjari and other scholarly treatises. Rupa Goswami's and Appaya Dixit's texts are also important in this 16th century. And finally, we have Pandit Jagannatha's Rasa Gangadhar, which is considered to be the last great text in the tradition of classical Indian poetics. In this brief historical survey of Indian poetics, we have seen some important names from 2nd century BC to the 16th century Common Era, and we have thus covered 18 centuries, 1800 years. What we have here is a list of names, a list of titles of texts, and this is very important because when we want to study a particular discipline, we first have to mark the significant texts that contribute to that particular discipline. A student who is studying Indian poetics must first identify the texts that form this tradition, that form this discipline. And when one identifies these texts and the theories propounded by these texts, then one can proceed further and pay particular attention to each of these texts and theories. So far, we have a general idea now that from 2nd century BC to the 16th century, that is from Bharat Muni to Pandit Jagannath, we have numerous scholars. I must admit that some important names have been left out because it is not practically possible for anyone to include all these names in a brief survey. But the most important names have been included in our discussion so far. And in our next discussions, we shall begin with the theories, starting with Rasa, to study this great tradition of Indian poetics or Indian aesthetics. So far, I hope students have